Imagine yourself standing in the heart of a dense tropical jungle. The morning mist still clings to the air, blanketing the moss-covered stones of giant structures. The air is so humid, and the only sound is the call of a distant howler monkey and the unseen buzz of insects. Then, as the mist parts, you see it. An impossible mountain of stone, built by human hands, soaring through the forest canopy. This is the world of the Maya. For centuries, we've been captivated by the idea of a lost civilization, a nation of geniuses who built magnificent cities, mapped the stars, and then vanished. But tonight, we will dismantle that myth. This is not a story of a lost civilization. This is an epic story of rising, of splendor, of collapse, and of extraordinary resilience. This is the story of the Timekeepers. Our story begins far in the past, 2,000 years before the Common Era, long before the great pyramids of Giza in Egypt were completed. In the jungles of what is now southern Mexico, Guatemala, and Belize, people lived in small groups. They were shadows in the forest, living by what they could find, moving with the rhythms of nature and the seasons. But then, they domesticated a god. It began as a wild grass called teosinte with tiny, hard kernels. For thousands of years, patient hands selected the best seeds, planting them again, and slowly, miraculously, transformed that grass into what we know as maize. The cultivation of maize changed everything. It was a revolution. Maize was surplus calories, a guarantee. For the first time, people no longer had to move. They could settle. They built the first permanent villages. And with enough food, the population grew. Those villages grew into small cities. And those small cities grew into something else. By the end of this period, something extraordinary happened. Deep in the jungle basin of Guatemala, a city named El Mirador grew into a sprawling metropolis. This was the first true city in the Americas, hundreds of years before the familiar peak of Maya glory.
El Mirador was enormous. It was dominated by colossal pyramids. The largest, La Danta, is, by volume, one of the largest pyramids ever built in the world. It was not just a temple, but a man-made hill supporting other temples on its summit. And the most astonishing part? It was all built purely with human labor, mud and stone. Its giant stairways were flanked by massive stucco masks of jaguar gods, each the size of a car, painted in brilliant colors that stared down at any visitor. Great white plastered highways, called Sacbeob, connected the main complexes, shining in the moonlight. Here, in El Mirador, the foundations were laid. It was here they began to scratch the first symbols that would evolve into a complex hieroglyphic writing system. It was here the first priest astronomers began to map the heavens, laying the groundwork for a stunningly accurate calendar. It was here the concept of the sacred king was born. El Mirador was the blueprint for the next 1,000 years. El Mirador eventually collapsed, its people abandoning it. But the seeds had been sown, and from those seeds arose the Golden Age. We enter the Classic period, from 250 to 900 AD. The southern lowland jungles exploded with life, but civilization was no longer centered in one city. Now there were dozens of powerful city-states, each with its own identity, dynasty, and ambition. Each of these cities was ruled by an Ahau, a god-king. These kings were more than just rulers. They were the axis of the universe, the sacred conduit between the human world and the spirit world. It was their job to ensure the sun rose each morning, the maize grew, and the rain came on time. They recorded their lives on stone monuments called steles. These were their eternal newspapers, proudly proclaiming their lineage, their rituals, and their war victories. And war was constant. The classic Maya world was dominated by the rivalry of two superpowers. Think of it as a Cold War of the ancient world. In one corner, there was Tikal in Guatemala, the New York of the Maya world, a vertical metropolis of steep, towering temple pyramids piercing the jungle canopy. To stand in Tikal's great plaza was to be surrounded by stone giants, like the temple of the great jaguar.
And in the other corner, its mortal enemy, Calakmul, based in modern Mexico. This was the capital of the Cayennul dynasty, the Snake Kings. Calakmul was a sprawling, expansionist power, controlling a vast network of alliances aimed at encircling and choking Tikal. For over a century, the Snake Kings of Calakmul dominated. They defeated Tikal in a major battle, capturing its king and sacrificing him. For the next 130 years, Tikal entered a hiatus. They built almost no monuments. They were a humiliated vassal state. But Tikal waited. In 695 AD, a new king of Tikal, Jasochan Kawil I, led his armies in a desperate battle against his mortal foe. And he won. He captured the king of Calakmul, Jaguar Paw, and dragged him back to Tikal. In celebration of this world-shaking victory, he built Tikal's most iconic monument, Temple I, the Temple of the Great Jaguar, where he was eventually buried. It was a world of dynasties, intrigue, and warfare, but it was also a world of unimaginable beauty and intelligence. In Palenque, a city renowned for its elegant architecture, a king named Pakal the Great ruled. For decades, his tomb was a mystery. Archaeologists thought his pyramid, the Temple of Inscriptions, was just a temple. But in 1952, an archaeologist named Alberto Ruz Lulier noticed something odd. A stone slab on the temple's top floor had liftable holes. He and his team lifted the stone. Beneath it, a steep staircase filled with rubble for 1,000 years descended deep into the heart of the pyramid. It took them 4 years to clear that staircase. Finally, at the bottom, they found a chamber and a giant carved stone sarcophagus. When they finally shifted the 5-ton lid, inside lay the remains of Pakal the Great. His face was covered in a breathtaking mosaic mask of green jade, his eyes staring into eternity. His intricately carved sarcophagus lid tells a cosmic story, Pakal falling into the jaws of the underworld, poised to be reborn as the maize god. In Copan, in modern Honduras, the Athens of the Maya world, they perfected sculpture and science. Copan was a center of art and intellect. It holds the stunning hieroglyphic stairway, the longest known ancient text in the Americas, telling the history of the city's dynasty. It was here that astronomers mapped the movements of Venus, their planet of war, with bewildering precision. During this period, Maya intellectual achievements reached their peak. First, mathematics. They independently invented the concept of zero or nothing. This is an exceptionally rare achievement in history. For them, zero was not nothing, but a starting point, a placeholder. Their system was vigesimal, base 20, using an elegant system of dots for 1 and bars for 5. Second, astronomy. This math allowed them to create complex calendars. Their long count calendar was so accurate it could predict solar and lunar eclipses and the cycles of planets far into the future. And yes, this is the calendar people misunderstood would end in 2012. It wasn't the end of the world. It was simply the end of one great cycle, like a car's odometer rolling back to zero. Third, writing. They had the only fully functional writing system in the pre-Columbian Americas. They wrote books called codices on bark paper, recording their history, prophecies, and rituals. But this world also had a dark side. Blood was essential. To keep the cosmos running, the gods needed to be fed, and the food of the gods was human blood. Kings performed auto-sacrifice, wounding themselves, piercing their tongues or ears to offer their own blood. And then there was the ball game. On magnificent stone courts, players played a game with a solid rubber ball, using their hips to try and score. It was not just a sport, it was ritual. And often the losing team, or sometimes the winning one, would be sacrificed. And then something dramatic happened. One by one, the great cities of the southern lowlands, once so mighty, began to fall silent. Around 800 AD, the wheels of civilization began to slow, and by 900 AD, they stopped. The construction of great monuments ceased. The stone carvers set down their tools. The stelae were no longer carved. The magnificent royal palaces were emptied. Tikal, Calakmul, Palenque, Copan, all of these great cities were abandoned. Their populations seemingly vanished, letting the jungle reclaim what was hers. For 1,000 years, great trees would grow in the plazas, and roots would tear apart the temple walls. This is one of the greatest mysteries in archaeology. What happened?
For decades, people searched for one single answer. A plague? An invasion? A peasant revolt? But modern historians and archaeologists no longer believe in a single answer. They believe in a perfect storm, a series of catastrophes that all happened at once. Imagine a farmer named Kin. He lives outside Tikal. His whole life, the constant wars between kings have forced him to give up more of his harvest. The city itself has grown too large. All the trees for miles have been cut down to fuel the lime plaster furnaces for the new temples. The land is bare and eroded. And then the rain stops. The fourth factor, and this was the nail in the coffin, was a great drought. Data from ice cores and lake sediments is clear. Right at the time of this collapse, a series of severe, multi-decade droughts struck the region. Kin watches his maize fields dry up and die. He watches his children starve. In the city, the Ahau performs increasingly desperate rituals. The king spills his own blood, but the sky remains brass. The gods have gone deaf. And this leads to the final factor, a collapse of faith.
The social contract between the king and his people was broken. The kings had failed in their primary duty. So one day, Akin and his family don't vanish. They just leave. They pack what they can, abandon the failing stone cities, and walk into the jungle, searching for any small spring that still has water. They vote with their feet. The social order disintegrates. The story of the Maya does not end with the collapse in the south. That was the end of a chapter, not the end of the book. Like a torch being passed, the center of civilization moved north to the Yucatan Peninsula in modern Mexico. This region was different, drier, flatter, with water sourced from cenotes, great limestone sinkholes filled with fresh water. Here, new cities rose. These cities were leaner, more commercially minded, and more militaristic.
The most dominant was Chichen Itza. This stunning city rose as a regional power. Its architecture shows something new. There is an influence from central Mexico, from the Toltec culture. There is a strong cult of Kukulkan, the feathered serpent. We see the Zompantli, or skull rack, evidence of a more brutal warfare. Its El Castillo Pyramid, or Temple of Kukulkan, is an astronomical marvel. On the spring and autumn equinoxes, a play of light and shadow creates the illusion of a giant serpent slithering down the pyramid staircase. Chichen Itza also has its Cenote Sagrado, or sacred well. Deep into this dark, watery sinkhole, people were thrown as offerings to the rain god, along with gold, jade, and pottery. There was also Uxmal, famous for what is considered the peak of pure Maya art, with intricate mosaic-like facades. After Chichen Itza fell, around 1200 AD, Mayapan rose. This walled city became the last unified capital of the Yucatan, ruled not by a single god-king, but by a joint council of noble families. This post-classic civilization also eventually fragmented. In the late 1400s, Mayapan collapsed, and the Yucatan again fractured into dozens of small, bickering city-states. And it was in this fractured state that they faced the greatest threat they had ever known. In the early 1500s, the Spanish conquistadors arrived. They had heard stories of gold, and they came to conquer in the name of the cross and the king. But they did not find a single centralized empire like they had with the Aztecs in central Mexico or the Inca in Peru. In the Maya world, they found a fragmented political landscape. This made the conquest incredibly difficult, brutal, and long. When one city was conquered, the city next to it kept fighting. It took the Spanish 20 years just to subdue the Yucatan. It was a brutal jungle-to-jungle guerrilla war. There are incredible stories like that of Gonzalo Guerrero, a Spaniard who was shipwrecked in the Yucatan before the conquest. He went native, tattooed his face, married a Maya princess, and eventually became a war captain fighting against his former Spanish countrymen. But the greatest tragedy was not military. It was cultural. A Spanish bishop named Diego de Landa, in his zeal to stamp out paganism, committed one of the greatest crimes against history. In July 1562, in the town of Mani, he conducted his infamous auto de fe. He gathered all the books, all the Maya codices he could find, thousands of years of knowledge on astronomy, history, medicine, and prophecy, and he burned them all in a great bonfire. Almost the entire library of a civilization was lost in the flames. To this day, only 4 known books have survived. In a bitter twist of irony, Diego de Landa later wrote a book detailing Maya culture. It was this book, written by the man who burned theirs, that hundreds of years later became one of the keys to finally cracking their hieroglyphic code. But Maya resistance was stubborn. Deep in the jungles of Guatemala, one independent Maya kingdom, Nojpiten, also known as Tayasal, on an island in Lake Petén Itzá, held out against the Spanish. They endured for centuries. It was not until 1697, almost 200 years after the Spanish first arrived, well after the time of Shakespeare and Galileo, that this last independent Maya stronghold finally fell to a Spanish amphibious assault. Many people speak of the lost Maya. We began this story with that idea. Their stone cities did indeed collapse. Their kingdoms were indeed conquered. But the Maya people never vanished. Their resistance didn't end in 1697. In 1847, the Maya of the Yucatan rose up in a massive rebellion known as the Caste War. They fought so hard they almost retook the entire peninsula, creating their own independent state centered around a speaking cross, which lasted for more than 50 years. And that struggle continues to this day. Today, more than 6 million Maya descendants live in Guatemala, Mexico, Belize, and Honduras. They do not live in museums. They are farmers, teachers, artists, and politicians. They are Rigoberta Menchú, a Quiché Maya woman from Guatemala who won the Nobel Peace Prize for her fight against military oppression. Many of them still speak the Maya languages. Many of them still practice a syncretic religion, a blend of ancient traditions honoring the maize and the earth mixed with the Catholicism brought by the Spanish. Many of them still weave textiles with the exact same patterns worn by their ancestors 1,000 years ago. And every day they still plant maize, the same sacred crop that built El Mirador and Tikal. The Maya are not a lost civilization. They are a civilization that endured. The ruins they left behind are not tombstones for a dead culture. They are timeless monuments to their genius. The story of the Maya is not a story about an end. It is a story of resilience, of adaptation, and of survival. Their story continues, written not in stone anymore, but in the faces, the hearts, and the struggles of the millions who still call this jungle home.